The day my mother returned to Portland with her legal husband and asked my father to cook him dinner, he already had 2 tickets bought to leave for Austin with me. The first thing Derek did when he walked into our apartment was touch my father's mug. Not hello, not nice to meet you. He crossed the living room like he was already familiar with it, like he'd already measured it, priced it, decided what he'd replace. And he picked up the mug my father had kept on the kitchen shelf for 14 years. A heavy ceramic mug with a faded painting of a lighthouse. My parents bought it at a craft fair in 2003 for $9. Dad had wrapped it in a dish towel every time we moved. I had never been allowed to touch it. Derek turned it over in his fingers and smiled at nothing. Then he let it go. I watched it fall in almost cinematic slow motion. The gray afternoon light catching the painted lighthouse, the small arc of descent, the way time seems to stretch when something irreplaceable is about to shatter. And then it exploded against our hardwood floor. White ceramic flecks skimmed toward the baseboards. The handle split clean off. Oops, Derek said. No flinch, no sorry, no instinct to kneel down. My father stared at the pieces for a long moment. He was still wearing his cleaning gloves from Grandpa's room. His knees were damp. He'd been on the floor for 35 minutes before my mother arrived, and he hadn't even had time to stand up before her key, a key none of us knew she still had, turned in our lock. That mug cost $9, Dad said. You owe me $90. Derek blinked. I'm sorry? 10 times the value. That's the household rule for broken items. He'd made that rule up on the spot. I'd lived in this apartment my entire life and had never once heard it, but he said it with such flat certainty that even I believed him. You're serious, Derek said. Every cent. I was 16 years old that afternoon, 3 months from graduation, and I had spent the better part of a decade watching my father work himself to pieces in a city that had never been particularly kind to us. Portland, the kind of city that looks charming in postcards and feels like a held breath in November. We lived in a rent-stabilized building in the Buckman neighborhood. 3rd floor, the unit with the warped front door and the radiator that made a sound like a man clearing his throat every night at midnight. I'd grown up listening to that radiator. I'd done my homework at the kitchen table under its ticking rhythm. I'd learned to sleep through it. My father, Samuel Ortega Lindqvist, was 46 years old and had worked as a structural drafter for 19 years. He was good at it, meticulous, spatially gifted, the kind of person who could look at a blueprint and immediately identify where the load-bearing walls were. He worked for a firm downtown during the day and took freelance contracts at night. I'd fall asleep to the sound of his pencil moving on tracing paper. I'd wake up to find him still at the table, coffee cold, ruler balanced across his elbow. He kept his work boots held together with duct tape until I asked him why. He said it was just practical. I was 11 before I understood it was money. My mother, Renata Lindqvist, had been gone since I was 8. She didn't leave dramatically. She didn't slam a door or make speeches. She just began disappearing. Weekend trips that stretched into weeks. Phone calls that arrived less frequently. Birthday cards with nothing written inside them except her name. Then one summer she stopped coming back at all. Dad never explained it to me as abandonment. He said she was busy. He said she was dealing with family things. He said it in the careful, hollow way that adults talk to children when they've decided the truth would cause more damage than the silence. It took me until I was 15 to find the truth myself. Our building has a basement storage unit that each tenant gets a padlocked section of. Dad kept his important papers there. Lease agreements, tax returns, my birth certificate, in a fireproof box he'd bought from an estate sale. The lock combination was my birthday. I'd known it since I was 12. I'd just never had a reason to use it. Until the night he came home at 2 a.m. shaking, and cried for 2 hours in the shower, and came to breakfast the next morning with his face completely composed and never said a word about it. I went to the basement that afternoon. The marriage certificate was in a manila envelope tucked beneath my old preschool drawings. Renata Ann Lindqvist, Derek William Caldwell. Married June 3, 2013 in Travis County, Texas. I was 8 years old in June 2013. I remember that summer because Dad took me camping and let me pick out any souvenir I wanted from the gift shop. I chose a chunk of polished quartz. I still have it on my windowsill. She was marrying someone else. While my father worked double shifts to keep me in a decent school. While he fixed his boots with tape and ate cereal for dinner so I could have a real meal, she was in Austin marrying a man named Derek William Caldwell. I photocopied the certificate at the library. I put the original back. I kept the copy folded in my backpack for 3 weeks before I finally slid it under Dad's coffee cup one morning. He read it. He set it down. He poured more coffee. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you for telling me." And that was all. He never brought it up again. He stopped polishing the framed photo of the 2 of them that had lived on the bookshelf, but he didn't take it down either. He just let it collect dust. I think that was intentional. I think he wanted her to see it that way, if she ever came back. She came back on a Thursday in February. My grandfather, my mother's father, had been living with us for 2.5 years by that point. This deserves its own explanation, because the arrangement was as complicated as it sounds. When Grandpa Anders began showing early signs of vascular dementia in 2021, my mother, who was his only local child at the time, before she left, arranged for him to move in with us, with my father, the man she'd abandoned. She called it a temporary measure, while she sorted out a more permanent care solution. She sent money. At first, $1,700 a month, which covered approximately 2/3 of Grandpa's medical costs, and 0 of the additional labor Dad took on. Dad accepted it without complaint. I never fully understood why at the time. Now I think I do. He was building something. He was being very, very patient. For 2.5 years, Dad managed Grandpa Anders's medications, doctor appointments, dietary restrictions, and the increasingly difficult daily care that dementia demands. He did it while working full-time. He did it without a caregiver's certification or a social worker's guidance or a single word of acknowledgement from my mother. He kept a binder, color-coded tabs, dated entries, documenting everything, every medication adjustment, every fall, every confused middle-of-the-night episode where Grandpa believed he was somewhere else, in some other decade. I helped when I could. I sat with Grandpa in the evenings and let him tell me stories he'd already told me 40 times. I learned which realities to gently correct and which to let him inhabit peacefully. I became, without anyone officially naming it, a 16-year-old caregiver. That Thursday, I'd come home from school to find Grandpa had knocked over his dinner tray. Dad was on his knees cleaning the tile when my mother's key turned in the lock. She walked in with Derek and didn't look at Dad. She looked around the apartment instead, assessingly, the way you look at a property you're considering buying. Her eyes moved over the furniture, the shelves, the window. Her face had the particular blankness of a woman who has trained herself not to show feeling. "Sam," she said, using Dad's first name in a tone he'd always disliked, sharp and casual at once. "Please make something nice tonight. Derek is an important guest." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in my life. In the weeks after I found the marriage certificate, I did something that probably seems excessive for a 15-year-old. I started keeping records. I don't know exactly what I was preparing for, but I'd inherited my father's precision, his drafter's instinct to document, to measure, to create a record that couldn't be argued with, and something in me knew that whatever was coming would require evidence. I started with the bank statements. Dad kept them in a different folder in the basement box, organized by year. I photographed every page going back 9 years with my phone, $1,700 a month from my mother's account, arriving with perfect regularity until about 7 months ago when it stopped. I cross-referenced it with Dad's payslips, which he'd kept in the same folder, his income, his expenses, the receipts for my school fees, the hospital bills. None of her money appeared anywhere in our finances. Not once, not a dollar, which meant the transfers were going somewhere else. I didn't know where until I found the notebook. I want to be clear about the timeline, because this matters. Everything I'm about to tell you, I already knew before she walked through our door. The mug breaking, the scene in the hallway, none of that was improvised. Dad and I hadn't scripted it, but we were ready. We'd been ready for a long time. 2 weeks before my mother arrived, I was sitting with Grandpa Anders while he drifted in and out of a light sleep. He'd been agitated that evening, grabbing at his blanket, murmuring names I didn't recognize. At one point, he said very clearly, "Give it to Patrick. Make sure Patrick gets it." Then he fell back asleep. I'd heard the name Patrick before. My mother's younger brother. He showed up at family gatherings in expensive clothes and left without helping clean up. He'd never had a stable job, as far as I knew. He had a new truck every couple of years and somehow always managed to look recently returned from somewhere warm. After Grandpa settled, I noticed a corner of green sticking out from under his mattress. A small spiral notebook. The kind you can buy for $1 at any drugstore. I shouldn't have read it. I know that. I know it now the way I knew it then. The knowledge didn't stop me. It was Grandpa's handwriting, precise and deliberate. The way he wrote before the dementia made letters unreliable. Dated entries going back years. Monthly records of transfers. January, $1,700. For Patrick, debt payment. February, $1,700. Truck payment. March, $2,200. Lawyer fees. May, $1,700. Credit card. Page after page, every month for 9 years. My mother thought she'd been sending money to support her father and her child. Instead, Grandpa had been redirecting every transfer to his son. He'd positioned himself as the account holder, a detail buried in the original arrangement she'd trusted without reviewing, and he'd been quietly siphoning every dollar to Patrick while my father taped his boots together and ate cereal for dinner and worked past midnight so I could stay in a decent school. $196,800. That's what I calculated later, photocopying each page at the library on a Saturday afternoon while the printer hummed and a man next to me printed tax forms. $196,800. Gone to Patrick's truck payments and credit cards and lawyer fees for situations I didn't know about and didn't need to. I sat on the edge of Grandpa's bed for a long time after I finished reading. Then I put the notebook in my backpack and didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Back to Thursday. After Derek dropped the mug and my father said, "Every cent," my mother's face changed. The blankness cracked. Underneath it was something older and uglier. The particular frustration of a woman who has spent a long time being given things without asking and cannot locate the logic of being denied. "Samuel," her voice had dropped. "Stop this. You were never this petty before. I became this," Dad said, "because I spent 9 years cleaning up everything you chose to break." I had never in my life heard my father say anything like that. I'd heard him quiet for 9 years. I'd heard him composed and careful and endlessly functional. I'd heard him cry exactly once, in the shower at 2 a.m. for 2 hours when he thought I couldn't hear. He hadn't cried in front of anyone. Not once. Not even close. He bent down and picked up the pieces of the mug with his bare hands. He didn't flinch when a shard cut his palm. He just wrapped the pieces in a dish towel and set them on the counter and turned the water on to rinse his hand. He was methodical about it. He was methodical about everything. Derek leaned toward my mother. He's been turning everyone in this building against you for years, he said. Loud enough for me to hear, probably intended for me to hear. The hallway door was open. The way sound travels in our building, the high ceilings, the old plaster walls, voices carry well. Mrs. Okonkwo from 3C had come to her doorway. Mr. Sato from across the hall was visible through his screen door. Another neighbor I recognized from the mailboxes stood at the top of the stairs. Someone's phone screen was glowing. Dad looked at me. One look. His eyes moved to my face, then to my backpack, then back to my face. That was the signal. It wasn't prearranged. We'd never discussed it, but I understood it completely. I reached into my bag and pulled out the notebook. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I'd imagined this moment, or some version of it, for 2 weeks, and I'd assumed I'd be terrified, but I was completely calm. The way you get calm when something you've been dreading finally arrives and you realize the dread was always worse than the thing itself. I opened to the first page. January, I said. $1,700. I opened to the first page. January, I said. $1,700. For Patrick, debt payment. The sound my mother made was not quite a word. February, $1,700. Truck payment. March, $2,200. Lawyer fees. What is that? She stepped forward. Marcus, what is that? May, $1,700. Credit card. June, $1,750, insurance, July. She grabbed the notebook. I let her have it. I'd photographed every page at the library 3 weeks earlier, backed up the images in 4 separate locations, my laptop, Google Drive, a Dropbox folder, and a flash drive I'd given to Mr. Castellano, my school counselor who had a master's in social work and 12 years of experience in youth advocacy, in a sealed envelope with instructions to open it only if something happened to me. Mr. Castellano had raised an eyebrow at the envelope. He'd asked me twice if I was safe. I told him I was safe, just careful. He'd accepted the envelope without further questions. He'd seen enough kids to know when one was making contingency plans, and when those plans were the sanest thing in the room. My mother flipped through the notebook. The color drained from her face in stages, the way the sky changes before a serious storm. She stopped on a page near the middle, kept staring at it. Dad, she said. Her voice cracked on the word. Tell me this isn't true. Grandpa Anders stood in the doorway of his bedroom. He'd come out during the commotion, drawn by the noise or some instinct older than his confusion. He was wearing his blue robe, the one with the frayed pocket. He looked at his daughter. He stared at the floor. The silence was answer enough. Dad had been quiet through all of this. Now he pulled a black folder from his backpack and set it on the kitchen table with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. 9 years of bank statements, he said. 9 years of my pay slips. Every school receipt, every hospital bill from your father's care, every pharmacy receipt, every copay. He tapped the top page. His cut palm left a small red smear on the corner of the paper. None of your money is in here, because none of it ever came to us. Mrs. Okonkwo was no longer pretending to be doing anything else. Mr. Sato had fully crossed into the hallway. The neighbor from the stairs had moved closer. The phone screen was still glowing. My mother's grief lasted about 40 seconds. I watched it move through her. Real, maybe, or at least real enough. And then something harder and more practiced moved in behind it. She straightened her jacket. She looked at my father. She looked at me. She looked at the neighbor in the hallway. Enough, she said. Both of you. Enough of this. She pointed at Dad. You live in my apartment. You will not embarrass me like this in front of these people. Mrs. Okonkwo made a sound that was not quite a laugh. She was 68 years old. She had lived in this building since before my father was born. She had watched him carry Grandpa's groceries up 3 flights of stairs when the elevator was broken and Grandpa's hip was bad. She had helped him drag the medical supply delivery through the lobby when there was no one else to help. She had signed for packages and held spare keys and never once asked for anything in return. Your apartment? She said. The 2 words landed like something physical. My mother turned to her with the measured patience of a woman who is very angry and has decided to perform otherwise. Florence, she said, I respect you, but this is a family matter. I want dinner on the table in 1 hour, my mother said. To the room and to no one, and I want this hallway cleared. She looked at me directly. And here is the thing about looking at your child as an obstacle. Here is the thing about looking at the person your absence shaped into someone who had to learn to be prepared, someone who had to learn to document and plan and survive your choices. Looking at that person and believing you still have authority over him. Marcus, go to your room. I looked back at her. I thought about all the birthday cards with nothing written in them except her name. I thought about the quartz I bought at the camping gift shop while she was in Austin signing a marriage certificate. I thought about my father's boots. I thought about the notebook entries, 108 months of them, and the particular quietness of a man who had decided a long time ago that he was going to build something indestructible out of the rubble of what she'd left him. I didn't move. She stepped closer to Dad. She lowered her voice the way people do when they want to sound reasonable and instead sound frightening. Samuel, she said, I am not asking. Dad looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked into the bedroom and closed the door behind him. My mother stood a little taller. The familiar geometry of a woman who believes she has won reassembled itself across her shoulders. stairs. Derek touched her arm. See, he said softly. He just needs to be reminded of his place. Mr. Sato made a sharp sound, like something snapping. Mrs. Okonkwo opened her mouth, and then the bedroom door opened. My father came out with a suitcase. I was right behind him with mine. I'd packed it 2 weeks ago, the afternoon after I found the notebook. It had been sitting in my closet under my winter coats, waiting. He stopped in the center of the hallway, in front of every neighbor, in front of Derek, who had gone very still, in front of my mother, whose expression was doing something complicated I still don't have exact words for. Then, you can't be serious. I started planning this, Dad said. The night Marcus showed me the marriage certificate. I watched her eyes move to me. Something shifted in them. Something that might have been recognition, or regret, or both. That was 14 months ago, he said. I've had a long time to get ready. He smoothed his jacket. He picked up the black folder and slid it back into his backpack. He looked calmly and deliberately at each of the neighbors in the hallway, at Mr. Sato, at Mrs. Okonkwo, at the woman from the stairs whose name I'd never learned but who'd signed for my packages when I wasn't home. 14 months. Dad said again, for the hallway, for the record. Then he looked at my mother one last time. The care logs for your father are in the binder on the kitchen table. His medication schedule is posted on the refrigerator. His neurologist is Dr. Hannah Wright at Oregon Health. Her number is in the binder. He has an appointment on the 11th that you'll need to reschedule if you can't make it. He hoisted his backpack onto his shoulder. The lease is in my name. I paid the renewal fee 5 weeks ago. The apartment is mine. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed 2 train tickets on top of the black folder on the table. Austin, departing in 2 hours and 50 minutes. My mother's smile was gone. It did not come back. Then my father walked to the door, and I followed him, and we went down the stairs without looking back. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant walking out of that building, that I carried something clean and final in my chest all the way to Union Station. The truth is, I felt like I was dissolving. I'd been running on preparation for 14 months, on research and documentation and the specific alertness of a person who is always listening for the next thing to go wrong, and now the preparation was over, and I had no idea what living without it felt like. I was 16 years old. I was leaving the only home I'd ever had, the radiator that cleared its throat every night at midnight, the warped front door, the shelf where the mug with the lighthouse used to sit. Mr. Sato was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He held out an envelope. From the building, he said. His voice was gruff, the way gruff men's voices get when they're feeling something they'd rather not name. Everyone who could contribute. Dad opened it. I didn't see the amount. He closed it and held it against his chest for a moment with his eyes shut. Thank you, hero, he said. That woman has never deserved you, he said. Not once in the years I've known you. He nodded once, like that settled something long contested, and we walked out into the cold February afternoon and didn't look back at the building. Austin didn't fix anything. I want to be honest about that. It was just different, which sometimes is enough of a start. Dad had a contact there, a man named Owen Bright, a partner at an engineering firm he'd worked with remotely for 2 years. Owen had offered him a staff position twice and been politely declined twice. The third offer came through in December of that year, 2 months before we left. This time, Dad accepted. We moved into a furnished 2-bedroom in East Austin that Owen had helped him find. It smelled like someone else's cooking and had carpet in the bedrooms, which I'd never had. I transferred to a public school for my last 3 months of junior year. My transcript traveled fine. My grades had been strong enough. I started senior year that fall not knowing anyone's name in the hallways, and by spring I'd built a small group of friends, and my father came to my graduation the following year in a gymnasium that was too hot, and he cried. That was the second time I'd seen him cry. But the other thing, the legal thing, didn't end when we left Portland. Here is what I didn't know until later. My father had not spent 14 months just packing. He'd spent 14 months building a case. 3 months after I found the marriage certificate and slid it under his coffee cup, Dad contacted an attorney named Helena Basset, family law specialist, 20 years of practice, offices in Portland and Seattle, with particular expertise in financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. Dad had found her through a men's legal resource network, the kind of resource that exists because it has to. He had 5 consultations before he signed a retainer. He told me later he'd wanted to be certain before he committed, certain of the case, certain of the outcome, certain that what he was building was solid enough to stand on. Mr. Ortega Lindqvist came to me with one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've seen from a non-legal professional. Helena told me much later, when I was in college and had started asking questions about the process. He had organized records that most clients take months to compile. I knew immediately he wasn't going to let this go. Helena filed on 2 tracks simultaneously. The first was a financial exploitation complaint. Formally, an Adult Protective Services referral escalated to civil action against Grandpa Anders's estate, specifically targeting Patrick Lindqvist as the beneficiary of nearly a decade of fraudulently redirected funds. The notebook was Exhibit A. The bank statements I'd photographed were Exhibit B through F. To support the financial analysis, Helena engaged engaged Donald Ferreira, a forensic accountant who had previously worked with the Oregon Department of Justice and had spent 13 years tracing financial fraud in family estate cases. His report, which ran to 51 pages, documented the full transfer history and attributed $196,800 in diverted funds directly to Patrick. The second track was a domestic partnership dissolution and asset claim. My parents had never formally married in Oregon, but a long-term domestic partnership with documented joint assets and a child carries legal weight that my mother had simply chosen to ignore. The way she'd ignored most things, she found inconvenient. Detective Marlena Chaby of the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit contacted us in August, 4 months after we left. 26 years on the force, 7 in financial crimes. She had the particular manner of someone who has stopped being surprised by what people do to each other, but hasn't stopped caring about doing something about it. She interviewed my father by video conference for 3.5 hours. She interviewed me for 45 minutes. She asked precise questions and wrote down every answer. Mr. Lindqvist, she said, using my mother's name, which I had already decided to change but hadn't yet filed for. The notebook. Walk me through exactly where you found it and exactly how you handled it. I walked her through it, step by step. She nodded at intervals. You photographed it before moving it? Yes. You returned the original to its location? Yes. And the copies are in 4 locations. You named them as your laptop, Google Drive, a Dropbox account, and a physical flash drive held by your school counselor. Yes. Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile, but close to one. Your father raised you well, she said. Patrick Lindqvist was charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult in October, 6 months after we left Portland. He hired a defense attorney, a man named Russell Crane who had an office in Lake Oswego and a specialty in estate disputes, and contested the charge vigorously. The civil trial took 10 months. I was in my first semester of college by the time it concluded, studying mechanical engineering, and I did not attend. Donald Ferreira's forensic report was the spine of the case. 51 pages of documented transfers, account structures, signature analysis, and timeline reconstruction. The judge, the Honorable Wendell Asante, Family Court, 18 years on the bench, described the conduct in his written ruling as a sustained and deliberate exploitation of a familial trust arrangement over an extraordinary period of time, executed with apparent knowledge of the harm it caused to the dependent minor and primary caregiver. Restitution was ordered. $196,800. Patrick did not have $196,800. He had never really had it. It had moved through his hands and into trucks and vacations, and a lifestyle built on a foundation he'd forgotten was borrowed. He filed for bankruptcy within 9 months of the ruling. A lien was placed on his remaining assets. The truck I cannot speak to. Patrick did not have $196,800. He had never really had it. It had moved through his hands and into trucks and vacations, and a lifestyle built on a foundation he'd forgotten was borrowed. He filed for bankruptcy within 9 months of the ruling. A lien was placed on his remaining assets. The truck I cannot speak to. My mother retained her own attorney, Bradley Voss, downtown Austin, a man whose firm website used the phrase "protecting your legacy" in the header, the footer, and the bio page, and was ultimately not criminally charged. She was named as a co-respondent in the civil action, which is a matter of public record. The reputational consequences of that, in her professional network and in the Austin community she'd become prominent in, were not nothing. They were, by some accounts I received secondhand, considerable. Derek left her 19 months after we did. I know this because a mutual family acquaintance sent me a message about it. I read it once and did not respond. I didn't need any details. It didn't change anything that had already happened. Grandpa Anders moved to a memory care facility in late 2023. My mother arranged it. She visited twice a week, according to what little remained of my family contact network. I thought about this for a long time. I thought about what he'd done. 9 years of redirected money, 9 years of entries in a ledger, 9 years of choices that left my father working past midnight with tape on his boots while his grandson slept in the next room. I thought about what that requires. Not a single moment of cruelty, but sustained, deliberate, monthly cruelty, dressed up as paperwork. And I thought about the man who taught me to fish, who told me stories about Norway until I fell asleep, his voice dropping lower as the words ran out, his hand resting on my shoulder, who reached for my hand during his confused evenings and called me by his son's name and looked at me with such complete and uncomplicated warmth that I would have answered to any name he gave me. People are not one thing. I know that now in a way I couldn't know at 16. It doesn't make the harm disappear. It doesn't resolve into something clean and manageable. It just sits alongside everything else, and you learn to hold contradictions without demanding that they collapse into a simpler shape. I visit him when I'm in Portland. Not often, but sometimes I go. Dad got promoted 16 months after joining Owen's firm. He's leading a team now on a mixed mixed-use development downtown, the kind of project he'd talked about wanting for years and never had the bandwidth to pursue, because bandwidth is a thing that requires not spending your entire capacity surviving. He bought new boots. This sounds small. It isn't. He walked into a store and spent 20 minutes choosing between two pairs, not which was more durable, not which was on sale, just which ones he actually wanted. He came home and held them up in the kitchen light and said, "Look at these, Marcus," like it was something worth stopping to notice. It was. I changed my last name in February of my first year of college, Ortega Lindqvist, my father's full name. The paperwork took 5 weeks and cost $88 and was the most uncomplicated thing I'd done in years. My mother called when she found out. I don't know how she found out. The family network still has its tributaries. I let it go to voicemail. She said she understood. She said she hoped I'd give her the chance to explain someday. She said she was sorry in a way that was careful not to be specific about what exactly she was sorry for. I listened to the message twice, then I deleted it. I'm not saying I'll never speak to her again. I'm 19 years old. These things don't end the way stories end. They change shape. They become something you carry differently over time. She is my mother. That is a permanent fact I hold alongside everything else she is and everything she failed to be. I haven't figured out what I want that to mean for the rest of my life, but I'm also 19 years old, studying in a city that isn't the one I grew up in, surrounded by people who know only the version of me that came after everything. I have time. I have choices. I have a whole future to decide what I want it to look like. That is a luxury I did not always expect to have. I intend to use it carefully. The mug is gone. I know that. It's been gone for almost 2 years, and I've stopped expecting to see it on a shelf somewhere. But sometimes when I'm washing dishes in my apartment, the one I share with 2 roommates, small and slightly dusty and lit by a window that faces a parking lot, I think about the lighthouse painted on the side, the craft fair in 2003, the $9, 2 people who hadn't yet become what they'd become, buying a small, beautiful thing and not knowing what would happen to it. I think about my father kneeling on the hardwood floor, picking up the pieces with his bare hands, not crying, not performing, just collecting what was left with the same methodical care he gave to everything. The binder, the folder, the pay slips, the receipts, the 14 months of patient preparation that looked from the outside like a man who had simply decided to leave. He always knew he was going to take us to Austin. The tickets were already bought. He just needed her to see one more time exactly who she was, to stand in the apartment that was no longer hers, in front of the neighbors she'd ignored and the father she'd trusted and the son she'd abandoned, and understand what she'd walked back into. I think she saw it. I don't know if it changed anything for her, but we were already gone.